Hey vinyl community, Mazzy here. This is an inspiration from Melinda Murphy. She just did a video on mobile fidelity, the good, bad, and the ugly, in a way, of mobile fidelity. Her picks, things she liked and things she thought maybe weren't quite worth it to upgrade to Audiophile. Mine's gonna be a little different take on it, but just to let you know, I've gotten also a couple of inboxes wanting me to do a showcase on the best sounding records in an audiophile way on my stereo. I may do that another time. I'm going through a period right now. For 2 weeks, I can't play records. I'm playing CDs. My cartridge on my Riga RP8 died. I have my turntable guru who's working from home and he's great. And I have some credit from a bad cartridge from several years ago. So what we're doing, I'm switching from a magnetic cart, an MM cart, to a moving coil cartridge. And I'm not going to get into that whole thing, but you should research that when you're into carts. Now, you have to make adjustments on your phono stage. Not all phono stage accepts MC music coil, moving coil cartridges. But I'm not going to get into all that technical kind of doodah shit about that right now. But I'm upgrading to a Hana, not an Omaha Introvert cart, but Hana is a cartridge company out of Japan, and it's a Hama ML. So I'm paying more to the credit I have, and in the next week or so, maybe less now, I'm going to drop my turntable off to him. He's going to upgrade and do all the balancing setup of my turntable. So I'm excited about that. Cart takes some time to break in though, so you should always be aware when you put a new cart, you know, it could take 50 to 100 hours sometimes, depending. Your mileage may vary. So original master recordings, I do have several labels of audiophile. I'm not a super audiophile person where I go for always the best version in terms of the, I should say not the best, but the upgraded audiophile releases. There's Music Matters Jazz, which I'm really into, and I get those because a lot of the original Blue Note records are so expensive, and then you don't know if they're great or crackly. But obviously, Tunes from the Man Cave has been getting a great collection, Chris, there on those, but it's a lot of work and expense to collect those. Music Matters Jazz are very expensive too. They can be from 50 to 75 up, but around there, and they're very limited on the secondary market. They could be 150 on it. There's also Analog Productions, but I'm not going to get into all those. I'm going to just show my favorite of my mobile fidelity. I don't have a ton compared to some people, but I'm going to probably show a dozen here plus a box set. All these I love. The ones I'm showing you, I absolutely love. The box set is more questionable, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But one thing you should note is when you get an original master recording, if it says original master recording at the top in the banner, that means it is definitely from the original analog tapes. If you see some, and mostly this is on the earlier MoFi recordings, if it says Mobile Fidelity Sound Labs on the front, not original, that means they're not sure if they're original, probably second generation from other sources. They're not digital, but they're not from the original first generation or the first master tapes, the final master tape. It gets really complicated and everything to get into, and that's for someone else. Plenty of, outside the vinyl community here, there's plenty of audiophiles that talk about this in depth and nauseum. I love these. Early on, I thought some of them were hit and miss, and for a long time they kept issuing the same shit over and over again. I mean, Crime of the Century, Supertramp, Dark Side of the Moon, those kind of things. You know, I wish they would expand, but they have over the last, especially decade, 15 years. Of course, the things I show you are classics, so I fall into that rabbit hole as well. But back in the 80s, late 70s, 80s, I guess, was it 79 or so? I'm trying to think what year this was, but we all waited for Mobile Fidelity to put out a Beatles box, and they put out this wonderful box. I say wonderful with an asterisk behind it. It opens up, and I've showed this with my box sets, all the records have the pictures of the original master tape on them, so they do not have the original covers. I think for me that was a failure. I wish I had the covers and then make them all gatefolds and put the master tapes in the gatefolds. That was a little pet peeve of mine. They did, however, have a wonderful book that contained all the covers and all the artwork of the records. So you have this type of thing separate, which is kind of nice, but to be honest with you, I prefer that. So I prefer the actual album covers. Certificate of limited warranty. I forgot how many of these they produced. Was it 1,000, 2,000? I don't remember. It also included a geodisc, which I used a total of one time. And it's actually a good way to set up your cartridge and your tone arm and your balancing of your tone arm and aligning it for your turntable, because you really need to have your alignment correct, and it can make and break the sound of records if you have a stereo with an arm with a counterweight balance and or cartridge out of alignment. That's one reason I prefer the Riga tables, because they have a fixed headstock. Some people don't like that because they like the more heavier tables. It's subjective in a way. But I like that kind of sleek, modern, light material they use. And Riga is a British brand, and they work with that. So I like that because it's almost like a foolproof way to at least align your cartridge, more or less. But I think these are bass heavy. There's questions. It says original master recordings, but there were questions about if these were actually the first generation tapes or not. I don't know if that's been resolved and finalized. If they have, supposedly it was the first time ever that Abbey Road let the tapes out of the vaults to go to a MoFi. They do their mastering in Sebastopol, California. They got bought out recently by Music Direct, so they're fully funded and they're doing great stuff. And also it depends. They've only had a handful of mastering engineers over the years. And I tell you, what they're doing now, to me, is amongst the best work they've done. And there's a gentleman, a mastering engineer, and forgot his name right now. It's on the back of these. Krieg Wunderlich. Krieg Wunderlich is a mastering engineer. And if you see his name on the back of one of these records, I guarantee you 9 out of 10 times it's going to be an amazing version of that record. But again, I thought these were a little heavy-handed, bass heavy. I prefer the recent monobox. I prefer, if you're going for box sets, find a blue box from the late 70s into the 80s. They're usually tube cut, some are solid state cut. Again, that's a whole other can of worms. So I'm going to showcase these records that are amongst my favorites. And again, I don't buy these just on a lark. I only buy them for the albums I absolutely love or I can't find it in pristine condition. At the end of this, there is one I have 2 copies of. One is still sealed, and I'm going to sell it. And I don't, in a normal world, I would give it as a VCLT, but these are very pricey and expensive. And I looked online, and I'm taking the low end of what sealed copies are selling for. So if anybody on the VC wants to buy it, I feel like a car salesman here. It'll be my last showing, and whoever inboxes me into a PayPal, I'll send it out to you. And that'll include free shipping from the bottom of my heart, free shipping media mail. If you want to upgrade to first class, then I'll add another few bucks, another $5 or something. But anyway, I'm going to go in alphabetical order just the way I pulled them. One of my favorite albums, and my original Capitol is kind of messed up, but the first band down music from Big Pink, this version is really great. These are numbered again, 33 RPM. They all have added information on the back, on the gatefold, but really good version of this record. Again, amongst my very, very favorite records. You all know, and I say this all the time, 3 artists by 1 artist. Ry Cooder is my favorite guitar player of all time, and these are my top 3 all-time favorite Ry Cooder solo albums. He's done a lot of collaborations I've shown in my various videos, but these are by far my favorite. So I had to upgrade, even though I have several copies of this. One of the few artists I will upgrade to a mobile Fidelity. These came out the last few years and I think they're still available. I'm not showing, I do have some CD MoFi things, but I don't really go for those very often. If I'm gonna do it, I'm gonna do vinyl. But Boomer Story, a great bluesy folk album. John Estes is on it, the blues folk artist. Has some traditional songs, has some new songs. An amazing version of Dark End of the Street instrumental with his bottleneck guitar, which is just brilliant and perfect record. This was his third record, Rycooter Boomer Story. And this is, even though I had I think I came in on a second album, when I got this, I fell in love. And it's very rootsy. You wouldn't even know it's from a kid from Santa Monica that recorded this record. Then Paradise and Lunch, where he mixes Tex-Mex music. Great sounding record. Again, Kurt did the mastering on this in Sebastopol, California, cut this record. This was originally produced by Lenny Warnikin and Russ Titleman, and has Diddy Wah Diddy, I remember, is where I got turned on to Earl Father Hines, a great jazz piano player on that. And I love this record. Tattler is the one early original song on here that Rycooter wrote, but great record. Has that actually it has a little bit of a Tex-Mex feel. Anyway, just a beautiful record. And lastly, by Rycooter, is this one, another gatefold, and this is Chicken Skin Music, accordion all over it by the great Flaco Jimenez. Beautiful, beautiful artwork, beautiful record. Gabby Ponui is on it, Hawaiian guitarist who Rycooter produced an album by on Warner Brothers also. But these are beautiful sounding records. Now switching to jazz, Miles Davis. They've been issuing Miles Davis albums over the last maybe 3-4 years tops. Let's just see, 2016 looks like they started these. Most of them are 45 RPM. I'm not usually a fan of 45 RPM. You get more space. Sometimes the sound stage is better, but I think if you're not A-Bing it, you're not going to know the difference. But they decided to cut these at 45, which means a normal single record is a double album in this case. And I'm just showing 3 of them that are from the second quintet because I think these, they're really tight sounding records, almost tighter than the original Columbia versions. The bass is tight and not overly boomy. You don't want that boomy bass, but the drums, Tony Williams drums, Ron Carter's bass, Herbie Hancock's piano, and of course Miles. And so I'm showing 3 of these, and these are amongst my favorite of. I mean, only made so many records with the second quintet, but ESP. Miles in the Sky. He got the name because of Lucy in the Sky. He was getting into that psychedelic thing, and this was issued the year Sgt. Pepper came out. So I never knew Miles had a Beatle connection until I think it was in the documentary I heard about this. This is a great record, kind of drive, and he's getting into that beat thing, approaching where he would go in 1970 with Bitches Brew. Again, a 45 RPM, so it's stretched over. Again, as I said, sometimes I like them, sometimes I don't. I don't like the idea of having to get up after every 7-8 minutes instead of a full 20-minute side. Although during a pandemic, it's kind of good because it gets us get our blood flowing, gets us some exercise. And then lastly, in the Miles Davis section, and this is a 33, I believe, yeah, In a Silent Way. And this is great. I do have about 5 other MoFi Miles Davis records, but didn't want to get into showing everything by every artist. But love those records. The other thing I love that did 45s and are really, really great sounding, and this is one of those things I wish I could buy them all. I ain't gonna do it, but I'm buying a few of them when they have their sales, and occasionally Music Direct has sales on MoFi. Not huge discounts, but times they are changing. This is the mono version, 45 RPM, and it sounds fucking amazing. This is a great sounding record anyway. The original Columbia is amazing. The mono is amazing. That mono box that came out on Columbia about maybe 10 years ago, I think it was reissued. It's the mono LPs, just the mono LPs that Dylan did on Columbia. Of course, where else would he have done them? Is really a good record, but this is, I mean, you feel like he's playing guitar in the room, and it's such a great intimate album with obviously the times are a change and Ballad of Hollis Brown with God on Her Side. The Lonesome Death of Hattie Carroll is worth the price of admission alone. Admission. I can't. Anyway, MoFi as they're known, great record. Then I'm going to go with a record that doesn't get a lot of love. I shouldn't say doesn't get a lot of love, but when you hear the whole Dylan discography, it's one that people don't bring up all the time. One of my favorite records is John Wesley Harding, so I had to get the mono version of this on MoFi. It's double 45 RPM again. Of course, it has his original song of All on the Watchtower, which Jimi Hendrix basically made his own, right? Liner notes, Dear Landlord, Pity the Poor Immigrant, I'll Be Your Baby Tonight. I mean, just the opening, John Wesley Harding has a really, really great sound. And again, all these MoFis, they're numbered. Then, this is the one out of this collection that is Mo Fidelity Sound Lab. This is Bill Evans. It sounds really good, but they do that because there's questions if they're from the actual original master tapes. To me, this is one of the most beautiful album covers of any jazz artist I've ever seen. I love this surreal photograph. And this is Bill Evans and Jim Hall, Undercurrent, MoFi. This can be got pretty cheaply. I've seen it for like under $30, which I consider cheap for a MoFi. The other ones tend to be around $50, but then sometimes you can get them as low as $39. So they're not cheap, but you know, how I look at it, you could go and look for, if you're looking for a particular record and you pick up a $10 copy, a $15 or $20 copy, and you buy 2 or 3 over the years because it's not perfect, by the time you know you're going to get a perfect version of it. So I am showing this album. I'd never heard this album, but I've always seen the cover. I only got this one in the last year. Love it. Love it to death. It's a beautiful record. Now, one of my, actually these two are 2 of my 3 favorite Jefferson Airplane albums. And Heuristic Pillow is never a really good high fidelity audiophile record. Just never was. It was recorded at a time when at RCA Studios in Los Angeles, where studio engineers and producers really didn't know how to record rock and roll bands. There was a lot of atmosphere, a lot of echo, a lot of reverb on the original, and it's still there. They didn't go strip things down and remix it. I know Jerry Garcia kind of was an advisor working with them in LA when this album was recorded, but this 45 version is the best version I've ever heard of this album. I have the Sundays mono, I have an original stereo, and they sound great. And I love those records. I grew up with this record, so I know it like the back of my hand. I mean, just as I said many times, Jorma Kakkonen's song, Embryonic Journey alone, is a stunning piece of acoustic guitar instrumental. So this, if you like this album and you want to spend the bucks, I highly suggest it. It's 45, so you got to turn it over, but it's killer. The drums on this, the opening up of She Has Funny Cars, you know, just blast it. And I tend to turn these albums up. What's nice about these Mobile Fidelity albums, what they call it, they're very crankable. You can turn them up and they just feel great. So I'm loving this record. The other one, which is a favorite of mine, Jefferson Airplane, one of the other ones is Volunteers. And this is a killer sounding one too. Again, 45 RPM. It's, yeah, this one just came out, what is it, 3 years ago maybe? 3 years ago. And these are still available, the Jefferson Airplane ones, I believe, on at Music Direct. Other retailers too, but I tend to buy there because if there is an issue, you know, they're pretty great about swapping them out. But I've never had a bad copy, but you know, it does happen. I mean, records are records. Now, this one really blew me away. This is my one of 2 of my favorites Procol Harum records, but this record is I say stunning a lot with these because this just jumps out of the speakers. Salty Dog, the opening track is just gorgeous. So if you like this record, I highly recommend this version of Salty Dog, Mobile Fidelity, Original Master Recordings. It's a 33, which is kind of nice. Again, I wish most of these were 33, but I hope I get that sense of the spatial, atmospheric sound and the feeling of 45. It seems to be more, you feel the room of the recording studio a little bit. But again, if I didn't know, if I didn't compare, I didn't know. And I'm not a big person who A/Bs records a lot. I do have a bunch of records where I have multiple copies of. I don't like to do that. Now, this was, they issued it separately, and this is Original Master Recordings. This was a co-op with Mobile Fidelity and Capitol Records, and this is pretty good, and some people really love it. I like it, but again, it's not my favorite Abbey Road. I just like the original. But this does sound really good, and this is the one I have 2 copies of. I have it in this bag, and it's in here, and it's sealed. And for $85, anybody who wants it, $85 is a lot for a record, but if you go on Discogs, there are copies cheaper, but most of the copies go up to $200 and $300 in some cases. But for my VC friends, if someone really wants this, to first come, first serve in a way, and then we'll do a PayPal email. I just didn't realize I had 2 copies, and this one is sealed. So if you want a MoFi Abbey Road, shoot me an inbox. If you know my email address, maslov@maslov.com, you can email me there. Don't send a PayPal until I acknowledge it, because only one person can get it. And if I don't, I'll just put it on the shelf and keep it for a future time. Anyway, that's Mazzy's kind of mini overview of some of my favorite Mobile Fidelity records, high-end audiophile records. Thank you, Melinda Murphy, for the inspiration. You're inspiring, and Mazzy loves you, and play records all the time.